you are practicing here. Is there any single case which you have defended the accused person in the murder trial without a confession statement in Tanzania? How many of you have conducted the session of murder here? I can see a number of hands. In my experience, no single case I have received on the murder trial without a confession. Where do they get these confessions? How are they procured? But for those who get times to sit with their clients, they'll know how these confessions are obtained in Tanzania. And once a confession is obtained, that's the end of the investigation. So it's upon you now, if you have time with your client, and you know that how he confessed in this particular matter, to know how you are going to impeach that confession. And once you fail, you are in trouble. Because the only thing you have ahead of you is conviction based on confession or records. So the issue of related to fair trial is serious. And some of these issues were so much into public during Mbowe's case. You could hear the issue of confession. Those people confessed committing that particular offense, and how they were trying to impeach that confession, that it was procured through torture or misrepresentation or something like that. So wrongful conviction are not to be avoided in Tanzania. For the cases I've conducted, there was a person who was sitting there. I have a couple of the clients who have represented. One of them is not here. But you wish you could hear the story from one of the person called Tete Kavunja. Tete Kavunja alikuwa anachoma chips. He was just kwa Kiingereza nini? Anapika chips. Angalia Samson kwa na msaada hata mnisaidie. Sisi tumesema tunashirikiana jamaa, tunasaidiana. Yeah, he was just like a nyama choma guy around Manzese. And it happened that he was called by a friend who was being arrested somewhere Kawe, who was found smoking bang and taken to Oyster Bay. And when he went there, he was asked, can you get someone who can bail you out? He said, I have a couple of them. Can you call one? He called Tete Kavunja. Tete Kavunja, all the way from Manzese, he went there just to meet his friend. They are all he was arrested, and they were put behind bars, and they were accused for killing the businessman somewhere in Kawe, who was killed the night before. You know what happened? This matter before Judge Hema. The guy who summoned Tete for assistance, he was acquitted. Because Tete was not aware what was going on. It was like a nightmare to him throughout the process. That's what we can tell you. Because he didn't know what to defend himself. He was not there. He was just summoned by the police just to go there. And he was joined in the murder case. He was convicted and sentenced to death. He stayed in death row for 18 years. He was acquitted based on what? On technicalities. That, the murder weapon, which was in the report, and the weapon which was tendered, it was not the same. That's the only acquittal he got. So basically, he was convicted, but he has been released on the technicalities for something which is not even aware of. For suppose he was accused to kill a person he didn't even know. So potential wrongful convictions and the hanging person who didn't commit, it cannot be avoided. So what are the prospects? Despite that, we still maintain. We have more than 30 years. There's never been any execution in Tanzania. And we maintain the de facto moratorium. The only challenging part on de facto moratorium, it means it's a discretional. Anytime someone can uplift it. You know, things changes. The government changes. And the most worrying part, whenever it comes to before the General Assembly, voting for moratorium, Tanzania always abstains. They've never voted in favor or against. So where are we? At least we could have voted for the due moratorium. At least we could have been relaxed that we are not expecting the execution anytime soon. So we are living on the mercy. So anytime We maintain de facto moratorium on execution, but whenever we're given opportunity to vote, we don't vote in favor or in disfavor of moratorium. But there has been some international pressure on the abolition. Human rights organization, UN, there has been some worldwide movement towards abolition. And sometimes you could hear some political wills from part of our leaders that they can see that there is that international pressure on abolition of death penalty. That's a prospect which we can consider. What is happening? Okay. Okay. There's been some discussion in Tanzania about the possibility of instituting moratorium death penalty, which would entail temporary execution. Moratorium could serve as a step towards complete abolition. That's what I was talking about. But human rights activism, yeah, there has been some pressures from the human rights organizations that there is a possibility that we can end up with the wrong conviction and the punished person who didn't commit the offense. So there are some pressures for people who advocate for abolition of death penalty. There may be some prospect for legal reforms which address this issue in some bottleneck on the criminal justice and to enhance the due process of the right and potential reducing the use of the death penalty. And this, we are drawing inspiration from the recent report. If you can see the whole report, it looks at the criminal justice system from the point of arrest, investigation, interrogation, arraignment, prosecution, sentence, and execution. So around these legal reforms, which we have some prospects around it, it can help us to shape this. And I was talking to Andrew Stephen here, who they've been working a lot around the sentencing guideline. Tanzania, we don't have sentencing guideline. And we have a lot of mandatory sentences in our statutes that always the court discretion is taken away. So it is the law which imposes the sentence. So even if you, they say you make the final prayers on the lenience on the sentence, no matter how much you plead in terms of mitigation, for the mandatory sentence, it serves no purpose. And interestingly, for those who have read the judgment of Carlis Tibonge, it's Carlis Tibonge, yes. The Court of Appeal ruled that in the murder trial, when person is convicted, you must make mitigation. When the mitigation is missing, the court can quash. So what are you mitigating for? Andy Stephen, can you help us with your experience as a prosecutor and defense lawyer? You are mitigating for the offense which there is no alternative sentence. So if we have these legal reforms, especially on minimum sentencing and so forth, we can have the very good. But we need some kind of public awareness, especially when we are looking at the public opinion. With over time, with ethical concern around death penalty, we can influence public opinion to change their position so that can be in position to abolish death penalty. Again. Okay. But global trend, Tanzania, like many others, may consider global trend towards abolition. We can see number of the country now, they are increasing day in, day out. We've abolished death penalty. Recently, we have Ghana, Zambia, Equatorial Guinea. They've abolished death penalty in ordinary crimes. Central African Republic, Sierra Leone, they've abolished in all forms of crime. So you could draw inspiration. And when we are talking about mandatory death penalty, if we are to draw inspiration, we can look at Kenya, Uganda, Malawi, and so forth. So these countries are ahead of us. So global trend, especially sub-Saharan Africa, we can see what is happening to our neighbors, and we can be influenced in one way or another to do away with death penalty. But we have a lot of decisions coming from the regional court. especially on the area of mandatory death penalty. So mandatory nature of imposition of death penalty violates African Charter, which guarantee against the arbitrary deprivation of the right to life, and the method of implementing the same, it's against the basic human rights, including dignity, prohibition of torture, cruel and inhuman. And some of the cases which have been issued against Tanzania, it has been mentioned so many times, Ali Rajabu and others, which has been ruled that mandatory death penalty is inhuman and degrading punishment in Tanzania, and Tanzania is supposed to, yes, I'm fine. It's supposed to amend the law. And recently decision, this is the matter which I was presiding over. I was representing Martin Christian Msuguri. This decision was issued last year. The same decision was issued on the position of death penalty in Tanzania. So we have all this pressure from African court and some other regional bodies towards mandatory death penalty and death penalty in general. In conclusion, the future of death penalty in Tanzania will depend on the various factors, including legal, political, social, and international consideration, as well as involving the public opinion. So advocates' efforts, both in domestically and internationally, will play a significant role in determining the prospect for abolition or moratorium on the death penalty in Tanzania. That's all I had for now. Thank you.
Tunashukuru sana kwa msomi Fulgence Masawe kwa presentation yake. Tutapata muda wa kufanya discussion na kureact kwenye hizi presentation mwishoni. Kwa hiyo tunaomba sana muendelee ku write down your concerns, questions, na tutapata muda wa kufanya discussion baadaye. Sasa kwa sababu Mheshimiwa Rais amemaliza kikao chake na waziri, tunarudi kwenye ule utaratibu ambao tulikuwa nao mwanzoni. Na baada ya hapa sasa, maana yake tutapata presentation yake. Alafu baada ya presentation yake, tutaenda kwa Mheshimiwa Judge. Alafu tutaenda kwa Professor Crispita Maina. Basi, kwa kusema machache, naomba nimkaribishe President kwa ajili ya presentation yake. Karibu sana.
Hello? Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon, right? According to my watch. Okay, in a few minutes, I will just make a very brief presentation. It's a highlight. It's actually telling you what you already know. I was told that a consultant is a person that you pay to tell you what you know. So I'm trying to be a consultant for you today to tell you what you already know in terms of the global overview of the situation of death penalty. The objectives of this topic, I would rather like it to be more interactive rather than presenting PowerPoint. That's why I make it very short and brief. I would love to see us discussing a lot about the current status of death penalty worldwide, then try to see the trends, variations. We have many countries represented here. We'll be happy to hear from them as well, rather than a PowerPoint presentation on telling you what you already know about how different countries are faring in relation to death penalty. And then to try to highlight some key reasons behind retention. There are some countries that are retaining it. Why are they retaining? I think my brother, I did not hear every part of his presentation, but he was trying also to some extent addressing that as well. Why are countries adamantly retaining death penalty regardless of the big campaigns that are happening? There must be a reason behind. And then in terms of lessons, what lessons can we learn? And especially, I think this is where perhaps I will be dwelling much in terms of takeaways. The number 5. What are the takeaways? I will rather focus on the takeaways for Tanzania after considering the global situation of abolition of death penalty. So, I think I've said all of that. I just want to give an overview in terms of introduction. Different countries and the situations. There are so many countries that have done something with regard to death penalty. When I see an African country, I'll just refer to it quickly, like Benin abolished the death penalty for all. Botswana has been retaining. I just highlighted on Botswana because I once was campaigning for access to justice in Southern Africa, and Botswana was very keen to execute. If you are sentenced to death today in Botswana, in few weeks you will be executed, unless there is an appeal pending. So that's why I highlighted quickly on Botswana. We have other countries here. Burkina Faso abolished for ordinary crimes. Burundi abolished all crimes, death penalty for all crimes. Cameroon is an abolitionist in practice, meaning that you sentence an individual, but you don't execute. And then we have Cape Verde. We have Central African Republic has abolished death penalty for all crimes. Chad abolished death penalty for all crimes. Congo, Brazzaville abolished it for all crimes. Comoros is still retaining death penalty, but of recent there are no executions. Other countries in Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, abolished it for all crimes. Then we have Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a retentionist, but in 2022, there were no executions. We have countries here, Djibouti has abolished the death penalty for all crimes. And then we have Egypt, that is retentionist, and Equatorial Guinea has abolished for some of those, unless for the most common crimes, I mean the most serious crimes. Eritrea, Eswatini have abolished in practice. Eswatini is Swaziland. Ethiopia is a retentionist, Gabon, etc. I don't want to bother you with these countries, but I want you to see how Africa is faring apart from other countries globally. But I will be laboring you much with all of these countries. Perhaps we see some of the countries around here, including, for instance, African countries here, Kenya, our neighbors, and we have a colleague from Kenya is going to tell us a story. What did they do to make sure that at least death penalty is not mandatory? Because there's, in our jurisdiction, death penalty is mandatory. Once you are convicted of an offense punishable by death, you will suffer death by hanging. It's mandatory. If you kill 100 people and somebody kills one person, all of you will suffer death by hanging. regardless of the magnitude and seriousness of your atrocities that you have committed. So there's no fairness in terms of execution. Liberia, abolition in practice. You can see something that is very strange. Most of the countries that were former colonies of France, most of them have abolished the death penalty. And most of the countries that were former colonies of Britain have retained the death penalty, except few. So there's a story there that you have to see in terms of lessons learned from these trends, as I'm telling you. So this is a global overview, as my topic is saying, global overview of how the death penalty is faring. I'll share the presentation with you. I don't need to bother you much with all of these countries. But now, quickly, let me go to Tanzania. There you go. I cannot skip that one. Tanzania here is abolitionist in practice. Why are we saying this? It's because since 1994, no person in this country has been what? Has been executed. So a person was asking me, do we have a national executioner? A person who is employed and he's being paid a salary from our tax money to do the job that he doesn't do. Tunaye mnyongaji wa taifa, sio? Analipo mshahara, anapewa na pensheni kwa kazi gani? See? We don't say that he's paid for what job. So, where does the salary of the national executioner comes from? From our taxes. For what job? No job since 1994. No work done. So if you have performance appraisal of the national executioner, how will you treat that one? Is underperformance or zero performance? And that is a justification that now this person does not have any usefulness. There's no utility in it, so we should abolish it as quickly as possible. Just an example. So, yes. Yes, on the map, yes. Yes, Uganda is right here. Yes.
There's also the raging debate on the LGBTQ movement and the death penalty purportedly being introduced in the act on sexual offenses of same sex.
Okay. Thank you for that footnote. Makofi kwake, Pasha Choma, one. Thank you. Thank you, my brother. You are giving me a footnote, and I'm going to add into this. Anyway, I know some countries like Namibia was thinking of reintroducing death penalty. Even South Africa. The countries that have already abolished the death penalty, when some atrocities happen, they kind of think we should go back, change the law, bring back the death penalty. We have that kind of thinking, and it's very dangerous. Once we have abolished the death penalty, we should not go back to it. So quickly, let me go to my second part of my presentation, which is like statistics, facts and figures. I think perhaps we have a number of figures. This is a global map in terms of killing, the countries that kill others because they are killers. Sorry, you murder because you are murdering the murderer. The countries that murder the murderers. So here we have a number of countries, and some of those are pinkish, most of those are, some of those are gray, and then some of those are a deep red, like Simba Sports Club color. See, so those are the colors. The color of blood is showing that these people are absolutely doing it. They are executing any moment they can execute. The colors that are pinkish a little bit, pale red, is because these countries have sentences in their law books, but they are not executing it. And the countries that are gray, some of those have abolished or have got some kind of moratorium. So at the end of the day, we have those that have abolished it for ordinary crimes only, and for those that are a little bit pale gray, those are the ones that have abolished the death penalty for all crimes. So generally speaking, that is the statistics of the globe in terms of how the figures are happening up to December last year. Maybe some of these figures up to 2003. What is the current situation? We have 112 countries that have abolished death penalty in total. we have 55 countries that still retain death penalty for the ordinary crimes. And then, as a number recorded up to this moment in 2023, possibly there is about 795 executions that have occurred. And then we have people in death row. Up to this moment, we have a number of people in death row. But these statistics don't include China. China and Vietnam statistics are not inclusive. So be cautious. The statistics may be, this is the lowest number of figures that we have in place. This is a global trend. So, because of your time, I don't want to bother you much. I've said about that. Let me go to the takeaways. What does all of these things tell us? I don't want to go further, but let me quickly. I want to go to, I'm skipping a number of things, and then quickly go to takeaways for us. If you read all of the literature about the trends of death penalty in the globe, what do we, as the country, as Tanzania, take away as lessons? What are our takeaways? I have tried to synthesize like 7 takeaways. Takeaway number one is that the truth that those who introduced the death penalty, have abolished it. We were told by the minister that it was introduced in 1940s, soon after the Second World War. By who? By Britain. Does Britain have death penalty in their law books? No. Why are we retaining it? The one that introduced it to our law books has abolished it. Why are we retaining it? Okay, that's truth number one. Takeaway number one. Takeaway number 2 is that Tanzania and some other countries that are still retainist have adopted this practice, which is based on vengeance. It's based on vengeance. You know, this is the awkwardness of death penalty. It's actually based on vengeance. That whoever does something wrong should also be in the same manner, in the same way, be subjected to the same type of a wrong. That means, therefore, if a person is a thief, his property should also be stolen. If a person is a killer, he should be killed. That's the principle of eye to an eye, right? Tooth for a tooth. So this is what the principle which is applying. Now, if that is the truth in terms of vengeance principle, we all know that vengeance principle is contrary to the essence of Ubuntu. You know the Ubuntu philosophy, that we are because you are because we are. Togetherness and respect of dignity of everyone. And now we have seen countries, our neighboring countries, that suffered bloodshed in their struggle for independence than any other person. Mozambique, Angola, and even after independence, we remember what happened with Renamo in Mozambique, UNITA in Angola. They were killing people. But those countries that had justification for retaining death penalty have themselves abolished the death penalty. Mozambique abolished death penalty. Angola abolished death penalty. Rwanda, with the genocide issue in 1990s, you remember. Yet, Rwanda has abolished the death penalty. And we did not have any kind of bloodshed. We did not have any kind of genocide. And we are still retaining death penalty. The countries that had justification of retaining death penalty have themselves abolished it. So this is another takeaway. Takeaway number 3. Countries with very effective and advanced criminal justice systems, far better than ourselves, have abolished the death penalty. So how fair is our justice system in terms of being able to pin down the right offender, the real criminal, without any human error, and being able to punish that person accordingly? How far are we sure that our system is effective enough to pin down the real criminals? So with our flaws in the criminal justice system, that's why we have our brother here, Magogwa, was sentenced to death. He is going to give us a testimony. If this guy, can you stand up, my brother? Unaweza kusimama mheshimiwa Magogwa? Simama tu tupungie hivi, mara nyingine tena. If the sentence of this brother of ours, tumpigie makofi jamani. Asante ukani. If the sentence to this brother of ours was not commuted, was not actually reversed, and perhaps this person could have been executed, tusingekuwa naye hapa. Alifungwa kwa kusingiziwa, kwa makosa. It was a framed up case. So if this person could have been executed, kind of cases, meaning that a kind of framed up cases or charges that do not have substance. So we have so many victims, innocent people being executed because of the failure and lack of accuracy and effectiveness in our justice system. We are not sure enough. And once you are executed, you cannot reverse that. Death penalty is irreversible. That's why we are saying it is very risky. Yes, very risky. Okay, I am finishing, my brother. I have number 4. Take away number 4. I'm finishing. Take away number 4. Since 1994, we have not executed a single death row inmate. So, if we have been able to survive without execution for 28 years, what is wrong now to abolish it? Because so far we have not executed anybody. Just take it out. Anyway, that is take away number 4. Take away number 5. Even countries with the devout religious populations did not consider the foreign death penalty as a practice to embrace, but decided to abolish death penalty. There are those that think that perhaps death penalty is embedded in religious thinking. You remember what Jesus told? I was in Zanzibar one day talking about death penalty. They said at least there is qisas and blood money in terms of compensation for murder under Islamic law. But under Christianity, they actually told me, even Jesus said that was actually propounding death penalty. I said, no. And those clerics were clever than myself. They told me to read the Bible. There was a chapter in Luke that said, Jesus said, whoever befalls one of these young persons, he should suffer death by drowning. Death penalty was executed in different ways. There is a death by crucifixion, like how Jesus was crucified. Death by stoning. Death by slicing. Death by burning. And there was also death by drowning. A very heavy stone will be tied on your neck and will be thrown in the deep sea. So Jesus was actually, this is what my colleagues in Zanzibar told you. Even Jesus suggested, if you are going to fault others, you better suffer death by drowning. I did not know about it. So some people might think perhaps death penalty which is applied in our communities is based on religious practices, which is not true, because God doesn't want a person to suffer. So generally speaking, there are countries that are very devout in terms of religious practices, but they also abolished the death penalty, including Senegal, including Djibouti, for instance, including Vatican, has abolished the death penalty. So who are you to support death penalty based on religious thinking? Number 6, this is almost the last but one. Emergence of terrorism and the practice by suicide bombers calls for the Tanzania judicial system and the justice system to rethink about the usefulness and usability of death penalty as a penalty. Because somebody will be ready to kind of get to the bombs and explode it somewhere. But immediately before he does that, you arrest that particular person. What happens? You will charge that person for attempted terrorism. Maybe you can also condemn that person to death by hanging. Are you punishing him? Is death penalty a punishment? Because the essence of punishment is deterrence and rehabilitation, right? Now, if it is deterrence, why people are still killing others while death penalty is still there, if it is capable of deterring? And number 2, if death penalty is for rehabilitation, how does a dead person rehabilitate? How do you rehabilitate a corpse? After hanging a person, will he be rehabilitated? No, will not be rehabilitated. Number 7 and last one. In some jurisdictions, the death penalty is used as a political tool to command allegiance and obedience to their governments. This should not be our case. I end my case. I submit that we need to rethink about death penalty and more vigorously as lawyers make our case very, very widely heard that we have more reasons for abolishing death penalty than retaining it. Thank you very much for listening. Asante.
Tunashukuru sana kwa presentation ya Mheshimiwa President. Kama nilivyosema, tutaendelea kupata presentation then tutapata reactions afterwards. Sasa naomba nimuite Mheshimiwa Judge Engela Kileo ili naye aweze kutoa presentation yake, na nimegundua nilikuwa siwapi time, ndio maana watu wanatiririka tu. Sasa Mheshimiwa Judge, with all due respect, nitakupa dakika 20 tu.
Habari za kutwa. Nipate na shikamoo zangu. Marhaba. Ya, mimi naitwa Engela Kileo, nafikiri nimeshatambulishwa, ni jaji mstaafu wa siku nyingi wa mahakama ya rufani. Namshukuru Mungu kwa hii nafasi ambayo amenipa nisimame mbele za watu mashuhuri kama ambao mko katika hizi harakati za kuhakikisha kwamba adhabu ya kifo inaondolewa hapa nchini kwetu. Yeah, my presentation is titled Death Penalty and Irreversible Torture, Analyzing the Moral, Psychological and Emotional Implications. Let me begin with a reference to the story of the persistent widow in the Bible. For those of you who read the Bible, you know about that woman who used to go to that unjust justice many times, asking that he be given justice against her adversary. And at the end of the day, that unjust judge did grant justice to the persistent widow, not because he wanted to, or not because he wanted to, but or because he feared God, but he gave her justice because of the persistence of the widow. And this story teaches us that persistence eventually pays. And I trust that by persistently advocating for the abolition of the death penalty, eventually, even in our beautiful country, Tanzania, one day we shall see the death penalty being abolished. And hearing from our guest of honor, the minister, today, I believe that even with my advanced age, I'll live by the grace of God to see that day when the death penalty will be abolished. Let me hasten to say that the death penalty, whether it be mandatory or otherwise, it is still a death penalty. And you know, a rose in another name will smell just the same. So it is my belief that at the end of the day, there'll be no death penalty by the discretion of the courts. There'll be no penalty in any country's statute books. Under the Tanzanian criminal justice system, as we have already heard, we have the death penalty for murder, for treason, and you also have the death penalty for misconduct of commander or any serviceman in the presence of an enemy, contrary to the first schedule of the National Defense Act, Cap 192. And the mandatory death penalty is provided for in cases of murder, and also in cases of offenses under the national security, under the National Defense Act, where the act committed is treasures, and the National Defense Act, Cap 192, where the act done imefanyika kihaini. It says in, I think in clause 11, 11G, ambayo inasema when in action improperly forsakes his station is guilty of an offense, and on conviction, if he acted treacherously, shall suffer death. So there are those instances where the mandatory death penalty is provided for in Tanzania. For treason, it is in the discretion of the court. Ordinary treason under Section 39 of the Penal Code. Now coming tomorrow, psychological and emotional implications. In many of my dissenting judgments, and I think that's why I'm here, because I used to give dissenting judgments in the Court of Appeal concerning the death penalty. So in many of my dissenting judgments in cases of imposition of the death penalty, I always used to point out that the death penalty was the only, in murder cases that is, was the only penalty where the maximum of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth is applied. This has been referred to many of the previous speakers as well. So it is the only crime where that maximum is applied. Jicho kwa jicho, jino kwa jino. In my view, whatever excuses we may give, the death penalty in murder convictions, it at most, as we have already heard, a penalty of vengeance. Ni ya kulipiza kisasi tu. And as you have already heard, even from the president of the TLS, we do not do to the robbers, for example, or the rapists, or the like, what they did to our relatives or our friends. So why is it that we do to the murderers what he did to our relative or friend? More vengeance is for sure not morally right. And even our hata viongozi wetu wa imani will tell us that vengeance is not morally right. And God reminds us, for those of you who read the Bible, in Deuteronomy 32:35, that vengeance belongs to God and God alone. In my dissenting judgments, I always also used to express the view that the state, by sanctioning the death penalty, is almost like stooping down to the level of the murderer, only that the state gives itself the legal right to kill. One may say, though probably the pro-death penalty advocates may not like it, that the killing in the circumstances is predetermined and cold-blooded. I would say that since it is only God who gives life, he should be the only one to take it under normal circumstances. And I say under normal circumstances because there may be instances like in wartime or other situations of self-defense where a person may be forced to kill. Amini Juma versus the Republic of Tanzania has been spoken about previously by previous speakers. And as we heard, in this case, the African Court on Human and People's Rights ruled that the mandatory death penalty provided under Section 197 of our country's Penal Code constitutes an arbitrary deprivation of life, thereby contravening Article 4 of the African Charter. And the court further ruled that the death by hanging is inherently cruel, inhuman, and degrading. Hence the evaluation of Article 5 of the Charter, to which Tanzania is a signatory. In my view, cruelty, inhuman, and degrading treatment of another human being, even if he has wronged us, cannot be morally right. Discussion on the death penalty in Tanzania, featured in the Nyalali Commission, which was established in 1991 to recommend changes to the political system. The commission reached the conclusion that the death penalty was a cruel, inhuman, and degrading punishment and was morally unsupportable. It therefore recommended its abolition. Already, as we have heard, the Presidential Commission led by former Chief Justice Mohamed Chande Othman to look into ways of improving the criminal justice system recommended that the death penalty should not be the only punishment in murder cases, but that the punishment should be imposed after considering all the relevant factors surrounding the commission of the crime. As you already heard also, the commission also recommended that in cases where the president has not consented to the death penalty within a period of 3 years, the penalty should be commuted to life imprisonment. The report by the commission was submitted in July this year. And if such recommendations are acted upon positively, then in Tanzania we'll have gone a considerable way in reducing the torture, emotional and psychological anxiety experienced by the inmates on the death row and their families. The constitutionality of the death penalty in Tanzania courts came to the forefront in the case of the famous case of Republic versus Mushu, which most of you know about, which was High Court and at Dodoma Criminal Sessions case number 44 of 1991. In this case, the late Mwalusanya J., who was an ardent human rights activist, held that the death penalty was inherently cruel, inhuman, and degrading, and so was the mode of its execution. He found the death penalty to be unlawful and not in the public interest, considering that convictions could be arrived at erroneously or for some reasons, including the fact that most poor defendants did not receive adequate legal representation. He also considered the question of protection of the society from the culprits and was of the view that a life sentence could be effective and would be in line with the requirements of the Constitution. Having found the defendants guilty of murder, he proceeded to sentence them to life imprisonment. Though in the Bushu case cited above, the Court of Appeal agreed with the trial judge that the death penalty is an inherently inhuman, cruel, and degrading punishment, and that it is also so in its execution, and that it offends Article 13, Sub-Article 6D and E of the Constitution, it nevertheless held that it was saved by Article 30, Sub-Article 2, as it was neither unlawful nor arbitrary. In effect, you may say that the court thought that it was the society and not the courts which were to decide on whether the death penalty was a necessary punishment. This reasoning was similar to the reasoning of the Court of Appeal in the case of Attorney General versus the late Reverend Christopher Mtikila. And in this case, the Court of Appeal said, and I quote, "In this case, we decide that the issue of an independent contestant must be made by Parliament that has a legal mandate of amending the Constitution, but not courts which have the legal mandate. All said and done, it is obvious that we cannot legally order that an independent contestant is allowed to vie for a political leadership position. That is the area of the Parliament administration to amend the Constitution in accordance with its Section 98, subsection 1." End of quote. The issue of independent candidates, as you all know, was taken to the African Court by the Tanganyika Law Society and also by Reverend Mtikila. And the African Court found that the country's prohibition of independent candidates violated Article 10 of the Charter, which provides for the freedom of association. Incidentally, the South African Constitutional Court in S versus Makwanyane and Muchumu, which was aware of the Court of Appeal's decision in Bushu versus Republic case, decided that the death penalty was cruel, inhuman, and degrading, and therefore unconstitutional. Chakason J was of the view that, and I quote, and I have bolded it, was of the view that, quote, even if the overwhelming majority of the public was in favor of retaining the death penalty, public opinion could not be substituted for the duty vested in courts to uphold the constitutional provisions without fear or favor. Bold and underline. Let me repeat. If the overwhelming majority, even if the overwhelming majority of the public was in favor of retaining the death penalty, public opinion could not be substituted for the duty vested in the courts to uphold the constitutional provisions without fear or favor. And the African court in Al Rajabu case was cognizant of the fact that being sentenced to death is one of the most severe punishments with the gravest psychological consequences, as the sentenced persons are bound to lose their ultimate entitlement, that is life. There is no doubt that convicted persons are psychologically and emotionally affected. Probably we shall hear from our brother there who has been in the death row for some time. He will probably enlighten us more on this. So we know that convicted persons are psychologically and emotionally affected. After being sentenced to death, they spend indefinite time in prison, not knowing whether or when execution will take place. Obviously, the situation causes great anxiety to the sentenced persons and also to their families. And as we have already heard, in Tanzania, no execution has taken place since mid-1990s. You can imagine the state of mind in which those convicted find themselves. Psychological and emotional implications are not only for the convicted persons, but as I have already said, even for their loved ones or those who are close to him. I know my time is limited, so I'm going to skip a few paragraphs. The death penalty and irreversible torture. We have already heard that the death penalty is irreversible, and we know it. It is, the death penalty is one penalty which makes error irreversible. You can't reverse it once you have executed the one you consider to be a murderer. I always discussed in those dissenting judgments at the Court of Appeal that chances of error are inescapable when based on human judgment. As human beings, we are surely not perfect. Only God is infallible. I also pointed out that our criminal justice system provides for a chance of scrutiny at the 3 levels in most of the other criminal cases, from the district court to the high court and the Court of Appeal. But it is not so with crimes that attract capital punishment. Such cases have only 2 stages, the high court and the Court of Appeal. That we can sometimes err is recognized in our justice system, and that is why there is legal provision for the review of the Court of Appeal, for the Court of Appeal's own decisions where circumstances dictate. Hopefully, constitutional reform, which will come about soon, I hope so, the reform will give room for the establishment of a Supreme Court, which may provide a 3rd tier of scrutiny of cases where death penalty has been imposed. There is no death of instances, for example, in other jurisdictions where innocent people have been executed. An article posted in on CBC News by Neil MacDonald on the 13th of February 2012 underscores the abolitionist conviction that the death penalty is not proper because we may kill or put someone to death who did not otherwise commit the crime. There's been a number of instances where innocent people have been executed. And MacDonald had this to say, and I quote, he was talking about the death penalty. The title of the message was "The Death Penalty America isn't having." And he said, and I quote, "Add to that the fact that according to the Death Penalty Information Center, Texas has released 12 men from death row since 1973, usually after prisoners' advocates discovered new evidence of their innocence, much of it resulting from DNA testing. To be clear, Texas intended to put 12 innocent men to death. Nationwide, over the same period, the number is 140, end of quote. There have been instances of executed persons being pardoned posthumously. One such person is Timothy Evans. This occurred in the United Kingdom. Timothy Evans was tried and executed in 1950 for the murder of his baby daughter, Geraldine. An official inquiry conducted 16 years later determined that it was Evans' fellow tenant, serial killer John Reginald Halliday Christie, who was responsible for the murder. Admittedly, this is not an isolated case. Though he was exonerated, we can ask ourselves one question: of what good was it to the innocent man who had long been in the grave? You are innocent, you come to be exonerated, but of what good will that be to that innocent man who has already been executed? Racial prejudices, dishonesty, inefficient personnel at the investigating and trial stages are among the factors that lead to wrongful conviction, leading to execution of innocent persons. I think it was Mr. Advocate Masawe who was talking about those confessions that are obtained by the police. And as you were saying, in every murder case you'll come across a confession. Na ni kweli kabisa yani. Utakuta kwamba watakwambia kwamba alitoa maelezo, alionywa, alafu kuna kile kipengele, there's that provision which requires that the suspect be informed before the taking of his statement that he's free to have a friend, a relative, or even his lawyer present when the statement is being taken. Lakini ukiangalia hizo statements zote, all those statements, they will just say he was asked whether he wanted to have a friend or a relative present, and he said no. Hasa unajiuliza makesi yote hayo, kila mmoja alikuwa anasema sihitaji mtu awepo hapo. Hasa that's ni swali ambalo inabidi tujiulize, lakini for sure there's a lot of inefficiency both at the investigation, prosecution and trial level. Kwa hivyo kuna nafasi kubwa. There's room, a big room for wrongful convictions sometimes. George Ryan, one-time governor of Illinois, following a report of a commission he had set up on capital punishment to examine Illinois' death penalty, noted the following in their court: the Illinois capital punishment system is so fraught with error and has come so close to the ultimate nightmare, the state's taking of innocent life, end of quote. Governor Ryan received national attention for his 2000 moratorium on execution in Illinois, and for commuting more than 160 death sentences to life sentences in 2003. So the question to ask, and it has been asked once again, it is if wrongful convictions occur in the advanced legal systems, what about in our criminal justice system, which is so fraught with many inefficiencies? I do not know how others feel when they become part of a system where an innocent person is executed. But this should constitute a cause of sleepless nights to those with clear consciences. Imagine the torture and anxiety of an innocent man or woman on the death row who keeps on insisting on his innocence to the last breath. His friends and relatives who believe in his innocence are also subjected to the same torture. They suffer psychologically and emotionally. An English jurist, William Blackstone, once said, "Better that 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent man suffer." I couldn't agree with him more. I think even our father of the nation, Mwalimu Nyerere, did refer, when he was talking to some judges, I couldn't come up with a book that contains his statement, but I remember that he once said that it's better that 99 guilty men go free than one man, one innocent man be convicted. The death penalty and the victims' families. Sometimes we keep on thinking that all the victims' families favor the death penalty, but that's not the case really. There are many victims' families who are opposed to the death penalty, and some have even formed organizations to campaign for the commuting of the penalty of their relatives' killer. Marie Vezuli, whose sister Catherine was murdered, said, "I couldn't imagine what, if anything, could bring me comfort or lessen my pain and despair, but I knew it wasn't the death penalty." You can get this from the Murder Victims Families for Human Rights website. And also there's Reverend Walter Everett of Pennsylvania, whose son was shot and killed. After hearing the defendant's expression of remorse in court, he began corresponding and eventually visiting the man convicted of the murder, and 3 years later testified in support of